This is Special Session. I'm your host, Brian Schott. You know, we may be in the midst of a global economic meltdown, but news about Utah politics just does not stop, so I'm glad to have you on board. You do realize that we're living out the plot of the Star Wars film, The Phantom Menace, in real time, right? Just go look at the opening crawl of the movie. It says, "Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute. Hoping to resolve the matter with a blockade of deadly battleships, the greedy Trade Federation has stopped all shipping to the small planet of Naboo. While the Congress of the Republic endlessly debates this alarming chain of events, the Supreme Chancellor has secretly dispatched 2 Jedi Knights, the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, to settle the conflict." That sounds a hell of a lot like what's going on right now. The only thing I don't know is who those Jedi Knights who were secretly dispatched to resolve the conflict would be. Maybe that hasn't happened yet. Now, I have been spending way too much time thinking about this, and I believe that there's an argument to be made that in this real-life version of the Phantom Menace, Jar Jar Binks is Utah Senator Mike Lee. Hear me out. Jar Jar was an outcast from the Gungan society. He was clumsy, he was annoying, nobody liked him, but he was able to return to favor after he helped to create an alliance between the Gungans and Queen Amidala's people. Lee was on the fringes of the Senate GOP, tried to stop Donald Trump from becoming the party's nominee for president, but then switched his tune, has become one of Trump's biggest cheerleaders, and has returned to favor in the national GOP. Here's where this analogy really fits, and you have to go forward into later movies. If you remember in episode 3, Emperor Palpatine he manipulated Jar Jar to propose that he be given emergency executive powers, and that led to the dissolution of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. He used these emergency powers to give himself total power, and if you haven't put it together yet, Donald Trump would be Emperor Palpatine in this scenario. But he used these emergency powers to give himself total power and dissolve the Republic. In the lead up to January 6th, Lee worked overtime to try to find a way to make Trump's attempt to overthrow an election fit with the Constitution. That sounds kind of the same thing. And he's currently attacking judges who dare to oppose Trump and Palpatine. I think the analogy fits, but I won't belabor the point anymore. Anyway, let's get to the top news from the last week. We're still on hold waiting to hear whether or not the Republican-controlled legislature is going to try to override any of Governor Spencer Cox's vetoes from the 2025 legislature. One of the vetoes that might get overridden is HB 306. That was sponsored by Representative Ken Ivory. And what that does is it allows the state, or it authorizes the state, to hire a company to set up a system that would enable the state to pay vendors using gold if that's how those vendors wanted to be paid. Right now, Utah already holds about $60 million in gold purchased over the last year because of another bill sponsored by Representative Ken Ivory. Governor Spencer Cox, when he vetoed the bill, said that hiring a vendor to come up with a system that would be able to integrate with the state's accounting system was a really complicated proposition, and that's why he vetoed it. House leadership has already polled members on which bills they want to override, and I'm told that they have enough votes to override the veto on this bill. We won't know about the Senate. Senate President Stuart Adams has been traveling, apparently, and will poll his membership next week. And if they can get 2/3 in the Senate, well, then they'll probably try to override this bill. There's a big push from right-wing groups like the Utah Eagle Forum, the Utah Citizens for the Constitution. They really want this veto overridden. Also, when he vetoed the bill, Cox said he was worried about how much it was going to cost to set up this system. The legislature did not fund this bill. But Ivory has said that there's a private donor who's offered to cover the $147,000 to hire this vendor to come up with a system. That private vendor is a guy named Kevin Freeman, and he hosts a podcast called Economic War Room. And here's what you need to know about him. Freeman is a right-wing personality. He's really gone in on this whole using gold as legal tender. And in fact, he wrote a book about it. And the book is called Pirate Money, Discovering the Founders' Hidden Plan for Economic Justice and Defeating the Great Reset. In his book, Freeman claims that the Founding Fathers hid a clause in the Constitution that allows states to use pirate money, which would be gold bullion, as currency. That theory might sound a little bit out there, but considering the time that the Constitution was written, it makes sense. I mean, hell, we even got Senator Mike Lee talking about authorizing piracy through marks of reprisal to fight the cartels. So, in context, it makes sense. But when you look at the title of Freeman's book a little bit closer, there's something that jumped out at me, and it's the word Great Reset. And if you don't know what the Great Reset is, it is a conspiracy theory that global elites used the coronavirus pandemic. They manufactured the pandemic, and they're using it to dismantle the U.S. economy so that they can redistribute wealth to bring about radical social change. And Freeman and his followers want to get back to the gold standard, and their end game is replacing the Federal Reserve completely because we're going back to the gold standard. All of our money is backed by gold. Freeman is going around the country lobbying state legislatures to make this move. He's pushed it in Texas. He tried it in Louisiana. Louisiana lawmakers rejected what he was trying to do because they didn't buy into the conspiracy theory that is at the heart of this book. The book is not about the Constitution saying you can use gold as currency. The book is about this conspiracy theory, the Great Reset, that there's some overarching plans, that there is some secret cabal of global elites, and they are plotting. They manufactured the coronavirus pandemic, or they saw an opportunity with the COVID pandemic to crash the global economy, redistribute wealth, and then they're going to rule over everything. That's what is at the center of this book. And you've got Utah lawmakers buying into it hook, line, and sinker. He was the inspiration for Ivory's bill last year that allowed the state to invest in gold. It's a hedge against inflation and economic uncertainty. Well, maybe it's also fueled by this absolutely bonkers conspiracy theory that Klaus Schwab and his minions are trying to take over the world. So you have to understand where this bill came from. The House has enough votes to override the veto. I suspect the Senate will get there too. There's a lot of lobbying going on right now. Freeman sent a video address to the Utah Eagle Forum's 2024 convention right before they initially passed the bill allowing the state to invest in gold. So on the surface, this kind of sounds good. Freeman and his supporters, like Ken Ivory, say that we want to use it as a hedge against inflation and it's a hedge against economic uncertainty. But they want to get the U.S. back on the gold standard. The United States abandoned the gold standard after the Great Depression because there can be some volatility in the markets. I mean, gold went above $3,100 this week in response to President Trump's tariffs. And it also severely restrains what governments are able to do because they only have a fixed amount of money to spend. You can only spend what you have in your gold reserve rather than what we do now, which is the government can print its own currency. So you have to understand where this stuff is coming from. It's based on a conspiracy theory, and I'm guessing that the legislature is going to override this veto. Boy, it was a fun week for the Utah Board of Education. They discussed and ultimately rejected a resolution to remove DEI from schools, claiming that it was, quote, attempting to achieve the Soviet communist goal of actual equality. The resolution failed in a vote of 10-4 after a lot of pushback from the public. Now, it's a resolution. It's not a rule. It doesn't carry the same legal authority, but this is the kind of thing that Republicans love to do. If you ever have the opportunity to sit through a Republican State Central Committee meeting, and I don't recommend that you do, but if you ever want to, there's a lot of fighting about resolutions. They propose resolutions for pretty much anything and everything. After the legislature changed the state flag, the Republican Party passed a resolution opposing the move. A lot of times, the people who support these resolutions, who vote in favor of them, think that it should be treated like the Word of God, like the resolution should be the same as a law. Well, they passed a resolution, so we shouldn't do that, or we should do this. And that's just not the way it works. The resolution is just a position statement. It's how this organization feels on something, and you can take it or you can leave it. The legislature passes resolutions all the time, and most of them really don't do anything. Occasionally, they'll put stuff on the ballot, but for the most part, they don't really do anything. It's just a statement of how they're feeling, vibes, if you will. So this resolution eliminated all DEI from public education in the state because it was aligned with communist Russia, which is not true. And you got to love the fact that the people who are in charge of our public education can't be bothered to Google something. I suspect that if you ask them to define DEI, they wouldn't be able to tell you what it is. The draft of the resolution said that DEI came from Soviet Russia as part of a communist effort to achieve equality. But that's just not true. And at the end of the day, the State Board of Education wasted a bunch of time debating this. The other thing that they did this week, the board also rejected a proposal to send a letter to President Donald Trump, patting him on the back, saying attaboy for dismantling the U.S. Department of Education. That proposal was also shot down on a 10-4 vote. There was one line in the letter that said, "We intend to pursue a revenue plan free of federal funding and ask that you join us in championing these endeavors within our state and beyond." That is the dream of some hardcore conservatives in Utah, to just completely disconnect the state from any sort of federal funding. And they take great pride in the fact that Utah is one of the few Republican states that actually gives more to the federal government than it takes in federal funds. And there are benefits to that. You're not at the whims of the federal government. But a lot of board members in this discussion were worried that the state would never replace the federal funding for education if that were to happen. Utah gets about 11% of its budget for education from the federal government. Most of that goes towards special education and for student meals. At the end of the day, they voted that proposal down as well and wasted more time on the proposal, Your Government in Action, folks. There was a report that came out this week about some of the activities of Representative Celeste Malloy before she was elected to Congress that raised some eyebrows. And some of this we knew before, but it's still very interesting to put it all into context. As you know, Malloy rocketed out of nowhere in 2023. She was a staffer for Representative Chris Stewart and came out of nowhere after he announced his surprise retirement. She was able to win the special election to replace him and then was elected to a full term last year. Before she was in Congress, Malloy was an attorney in Washington County. She worked on public lands issues, and she was also on the board of directors for a group called the Foundation for Integrated Resource Management, or FIRM, and she joined in 2018. In the 2 years prior to that, 2016 and 2017, the Utah Legislature gave FIRM $400,000, and the money was to fund lawsuits challenging federal control of public lands. FIRM never filed a lawsuit. We don't know what happened with that money. There was actually an ethics complaint filed by the Campaign for Accountability with the Internal Revenue Service and the Utah Division of Consumer Protection. That really went nowhere. But it's $400,000 that just vanished, and Malloy was on the board of directors for this group. Malloy joined the board of directors for FIRM in 2018. Those were the years after the legislature gave them money. So she wasn't there when they got the money, but she was there when they failed to file lawsuits with it. But also in 2018, she helped FIRM start another organization called the Rural Policy and Public Lands Institute, or RPPL. And that organization was part of then Dixie State University, which is now Utah Tech University. And that's where it was going to be housed. And she lobbied the Utah Legislature in 2019 for $300,000 to help fund this organization. They were supposed to conduct research related to public lands, according to some business records filed with the state of Utah that I dug up. Malloy was one of the founders when they started in 2018 and 2019. Updated business filings show that she became the president of the organization. Now, in 2019, Malloy successfully lobbied Utah lawmakers to give this organization $300,000, and that money was supposed to, quote, conduct high-quality research on issues relevant to rural policy and public lands research, and it was also supposed to train the next generation of rural policy experts through an active program of student development and training. There's really not a lot of evidence of what RPPL did with that money either, after getting that $300,000. It took some digging, but I discovered that in 2019, RPPL helped a coalition of local governments, mostly in Colorado, secure a $200,000 matching federal grant that was used to diversify the coal industry in northwestern Colorado and eastern Utah. And that grant led to the publication of something called the Coal Innovation Playbook, which came out in 2022. You can't really find that document anywhere online anymore, but archived copies are available on the Wayback Machine online. And so we don't really know what happened with that money. I mean, if you break it down, FIRM, this organization that she joined in 2018, they got $400,000 from the Utah Legislature to file lawsuits against the federal government. They never did a damn thing or gave back any of the money. Malloy joined them in 2018. Then they helped her start a separate organization in 2019 to do research. I'm assuming it's for the parent organization, FIRM. The legislature gave her new entity $300,000, and the only result is a matching grant for $200,000. And then that new organization, RPPL, it was dissolved when she decided to run for office. What happened to that money? We don't know. Just like we don't know what happened with the $400,000 that lawmakers gave the parent organization, FIRM. Malloy, ever since she's been in office, there's been like a history of weird stuff about her background or in the way that she's operated. When she ran for office, her registration as a member of the Republican Party in Utah was inactive because she did not live here. Her address was in Virginia because she was working in Congress. She only reactivated her voter registration as a Republican after the lieutenant governor's office warned her, and that was after filing was closed. There were lawsuits about this. Nothing ever came of it, but that was one of the first strange things. And she's also the first cousin of Ammon Bundy, the guy who helped take over the wildlife refuge in Oregon, and his father had a standoff with federal agents at his ranch in Nevada. Her mother is sisters with Cliven Bundy's second wife, so Ammon Bundy is her cousin. That's a fact that she really didn't publicize until I was one of the reporters who helped first report that. And then there's this story where she was part of an organization that took $400,000 from the legislature and apparently didn't do a damn thing with it, and then formed a second organization, got $300,000 from the legislature, and we don't know what happened with that money either. Guess we got to do some digging to find out. On Monday, Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. will be in Utah to praise the state for adopting a slate of bills that are part of his Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA movement. If you'll remember, the legislature passed HB 81, which banned fluoride in public drinking water systems. They also passed HB 402. Public schools can no longer serve food with certain food dyes in them and other additives. And HB 403, which restricts Utahns from using SNAP benefits to purchase candy and soda. And those initiatives are all part of Kennedy's Make America Healthy Again movement. We'll also have Lee Zeldin, administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as part of this press conference. We all know about the fluoride issue. I talked about it in last week's podcast about how most Utahns are opposed to removing fluoride from the drinking water. But the other two bills that they're going to highlight came from Representative Kristen Chevrier. And if you don't know who she is, you probably should. Chevrier is an anti-vaccine activist. She started gaining some prominence during the COVID pandemic. She had an organization called Vaccine Free Utah that really was sort of a fringe group until the COVID pandemic hit in Utah. And then her public profile started to grow significantly, as you can imagine. And a lot of her beliefs are founded in conspiracy theories, anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. So, of course, she's going to align a lot with what Kennedy is doing. Now, these bills to remove certain food dyes in them from public school food and restricting Utahns from using SNAP to purchase candy and soda, those are probably good ideas. And they're probably some of the more normal things that she has advocated for in the past, but she is solidly on the far right of Utah's political spectrum. How did she get in office? Well, she won a special election to replace Representative Brady Brammer, who won a special election to replace Senator Mike Kennedy in the Senate. And so she only had to convince a handful of delegates in Utah County to elect her to that seat. And she's going to hold it for at least 2 years. And then she'll be the incumbent when the 2026 elections roll around. And she is a product of the Republican caucus and convention system, in which only Republican delegates choose the replacements for lawmakers who resign their seats in the middle of the term. And I wrote about this earlier, but if you look at what happened with Brady Brammer's seat, where he is now in the Senate replacing Mike Kennedy. In 2024, Brammer was reelected to his seat in HD 54. He resigned it after he won the election to replace Kennedy, and that's how Chevrier won his seat. But let's look at that Senate seat that Brammer assumed from Kennedy. Brammer needed 171 votes. That's it to win that seat. And he was the sixth straight lawmaker to be initially appointed to that seat rather than an open election. The last time that particular seat in the Senate, now there's been redistricting, but that particular seat in the Senate, the last time it was part of an open election where there was a vacancy during a regular election was more than 40 years ago. So Brammer was appointed to replace Kennedy. Kennedy in 2021 was appointed to that seat to replace Dan Hemmert. Hemmert was appointed to that seat in 2019 when Al Jackson resigned because he took a job in another state. Al Jackson was appointed to that seat in 2014 after former Senator John Valentine was picked to chair the Utah State Tax Commission. John Valentine was a member of the Utah House of Representatives when he was appointed to replace Craig Peterson in 1998. Peterson was appointed to that seat in the Utah Senate in 1988 to replace Republican Paul Rogers. And Rogers was the last Republican elected to that particular seat in an open election. Every other time, the vacancy was filled by a special election and decided by delegates. And that's why Republican delegates are fighting so hard to save the caucus and convention system, because they have a lot of power over who fills those seats in a vacancy. This is an interesting story. I don't know how much impact it's going to have on Utah's political landscape, but we found out this week that the United Utah Party, which has been around since 2017, and the Utah Forward Party, which fielded candidates for the first time in the 2024 election, they're going to be merging, or they've got a proposal to merge on the table. If you look at the voter registration numbers, United Utah Party has about 2,200 people, and the Utah Forward Party has 200 members. The Utah Forward Party is part of the National Forward Party, which was founded by Andrew Yang in 2022. And they made a little bit of news earlier this year when State Senator Daniel Thatcher, on the final day of the 2025 session, renounced his membership in the Republican Party and became a member of the Forward Party. So he's the first elected official of the Forward Party in the state of Utah. So if the merger goes through, you'll have about 2,400 members in this party, and that will mean the Green Party will now be the smallest party in the state. They've got about 600 people. As I said, the United Utah Party's been around since 2017. Their first candidate was Jim Bennett, the son of former U.S. Senator Bob Bennett. He ran as the party's nominee in the special election to replace Jason Chaffetz. They've had very limited success since 2017. In 2020, Brian Fabby ran for state auditor, and he finished in second place behind John Dougal, but there was no Democrat in the race. He got 13% of the vote, which was 62 points behind Dougal. Last year, Michelle Quist ran for Attorney General as the UUP nominee. She finished in third place and got just over 7% of the vote. It remains to be seen how much of an appetite there really is for a third party. Utah is Republican dominated. If you look at those voter registration numbers, Republicans, the biggest political party in Utah, followed by unaffiliated voters, and then the Democrats. And even if the two parties merge, their 2,400 members are going to equal about 1/1,000th of all the registered voters in the state. Realistically, it's going to be very hard for this new merged party to gain any sort of traction. That's just the way it works. It's really hard to get voters to abandon the two-party system because they haven't won anything. Thatcher switched parties. He had already won an election, and he's not running for re-election when his term is up next year. So the reality of the situation is it's going to be really difficult for them to get any sort of traction. Maybe they'll get a boost from their convention. Former New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman, who is the co-founder of the Forward Party, she's scheduled to be the keynote speaker at that. Maybe they'll get a little bit of a boost, but they've still got a huge hill to climb if they want to become relevant. They're behind a bunch of other parties, the Constitution Party, the Independent American Party, the Libertarians. They wish they were the Libertarian Party in Utah right now, and they're not close. We'll see what happens, but the cynical in me says don't hold your breath. I'm sure there's a lot more that we could talk about, but we're going to leave it there for this week. Before we go, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to this podcast if you already haven't, and leave us a rating and review wherever you can, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. That just helps the algorithm suggest this show to more listeners, and more listeners means more support. So if you could do that, I'd really appreciate it. Remember to sign up for my newsletter at utahpoliticalwatch.news. That's absolutely free. If you do appreciate what I do and you want to become a supporter, help me create more journalism, more podcasts like this, you can become a paid subscriber for as little as $5 a month. Being an independent journalist like I am, that takes time and resources, and I can't do it for free. I'd love to be able to do it for free, but I can't. So I have to depend on supporters and subscribers to keep doing what I'm doing. That's just the reality of it. So if you can swing a subscription, I would really appreciate it. If you're a local business that would like to support or sponsor this podcast, let's talk. My email is linked in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you. If you have feedback on the show or questions, complaints, hate mail, a guest you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear from you too. You can also hit me up at my email, which is in the show notes. That's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week.